Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. I'm Andrew Langer, your host, and if you are watching us on our YouTube channel, you can check us out wherever you get your fine audio podcast content on the many fine podcast platforms that are out there. If you are listening to us on one of those platforms, you want to see what's happening in studio, check out our YouTube channel. Leave a like, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button, let your friends and family members know, and please follow us on X. I tend to call it Twitter, but for the sake of our guests, I'm going to call it X so they know what I'm talking about. At the Lunch Hour Pod on X. Go check us out there. Very excited as always when we have guests who are talking about timely issues. And I'm going to put my glasses on for this, gentleman, because you've got great bios, both of you. We're joined by César Báez. He is a producer at Reason. I will tell my story about suggesting to David not that they do Reason Radio at some point in time, back when podcasting was a whole thing. He was a program associate at the Mercatus Center, George Mason, communications coordinator at Students for Liberty in Latin America, and an intern at Cato. Lots and lots of things. And he's a native Venezuelan, right? You're a native Venezuelan.
Yes.
I've made that assumption. I probably shouldn't have. So you've got a good perspective there. We're also joined by Matthew Petti. He's an assistant editor at Reason and a proud New Jersey native. And I know the two of them are right next to each other, Matthew, New Jersey and Venezuela. Previously reported for the BBC in Persian and in English, The Intercept, The Daily Beast, New Lines Magazine, National Interest, etc. He was a Fulbright fellow. Wow. I graduated from Columbia University. It's so funny, Matthew, was Cesar and I were talking. I went to the inaugural Students for Liberty conference, which was held at Columbia back in 2008. Not that I was a student then. I was well past it, but nevertheless, I was invited. Gentlemen, listen, let's start here, which is, as we're recording this, the end of October, beginning of November, where do things stand with what's happening in the waters around Venezuela?
I mean, do you want to start, Cesar?
Sure. So the Trump administration launched a campaign back in September trying to target what they call these designated terrorist organizations. One of them is the Cartel of the Suns, and that's the term or the umbrella term used to explain the penetration of international drug traffickers inside the Venezuelan state, inside political institutions and the armed forces. So far they have launched more than 10 attacks. Most of them were concentrated in international waters, specifically in the Caribbean. But as of lately, they have expanded these operations to the Eastern Pacific, trying to target not only these international drug routes in the Caribbean, but also in the Pacific. But obviously that raises a lot of concerns because the Trump administration is not really providing a lot of evidence about who these people were. There have been more than 40 individuals killed in these attacks, and so far we don't have any names from the Trump administration. There's local reporting about that, and this is becoming a big controversy because this looks like a war that Trump started by itself, and there's just no proof, and there's a thin legal framework for all these actions.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
I just want to add, that this is all sort of happening in conjunction with a very large military buildup in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean region, which is not, I think, very clearly not just for fighting drug traffickers. I think the Trump administration has clearly telegraphed, as you said, Cesar, that because of the interpenetration of the Venezuelan state with organized crime, that basically to take this campaign further would mean to actually attempt some kind of attack on the Venezuelan government, perhaps regime change. Again, a part of the problem here is we don't know exactly. Like, they're telegraphing sort of these ambiguous statements of intent, but they're not really coming to the American people and making a case for why we should go, like how far they want to go and why they should do it. But it does seem like this is sort of a prelude to a larger confrontation with Venezuela whatever form that may take. We could talk actually later
Yeah.
about the certain routes that might take, but
And we will. Let me just ask this. So I attended the Reason Bulwark debate last winter, and Nick Gillespie talked a bit about one of the great hopes that he had, given the tenor of the Trump administration in terms of the first Trump administration, in terms of foreign entanglements of the U.S. military, U.S. intelligence, et cetera. And he had one of the areas where he had hope was in this area, because again, the first Trump term was marked with trying to get the U.S. disengaged and using a variety of forms of diplomacy to achieve U.S. interests short of military action. Something, it seems to have changed. What has changed with regards to the second Trump administration, and why September? Why Venezuela? What do you guys make of this? And either one of you, please go ahead and jump in.
I think there was definitely, I mean, it's sort of, I don't know if I necessarily agree that the first Trump administration was non-interventionist, but I think you're definitely right to have seen a ramping up. I think that there's always sort of two strains of Trumpism. There's one strain that says we don't want these like costly long-term entanglements, but the other strain that says sort of peace through strength, and what we actually want is to just punch people in the face. And I think that Trump has always liked this sort of this perception of cost-free intervention. I think that a lot of sort of Trump's foreign policy doctrine is around the Iraq War. And so one half of that is, don't start long-term costly entanglements. But the other half of that is this idea that maybe there's a way to show strength without getting entangled. I think this is a false promise. I think to some degree, like, neocons have gotten very good, like Mike Waltz, have gotten very good at selling sort of just one try, I promise, just one attack, and it'll end. And then, of course, once you're in it, then you have this whole credibility thing. You can't show weakness. I do think that a lot of this churn happened specifically in March 2025. There was a lot of palace intrigue within the Trump administration, and the more hawkish factions seem to have won. I think what has especially emboldened them is the fact that the Iran war that we had in June did not escalate to the point where Doves warned it would. That's sort of an open question, because they might start again. But at the moment, it just seems like they sort of, for lack of a better phrase, got away with it.
Yeah.
And so I think they're now looking for other places where you can do sort of quick show of force. And I think Venezuela, because it's such an unpopular regime, because it's sort of internally already teetering, and I think importantly, because it's in the Western Hemisphere, it's sort of tied to domestic priorities of immigration and drug trafficking. And there's a sort of an older strain of like non-intervention overseas, but yes, intervention in the continent. Because of all of those factors, Venezuela seems like a sort of perfect target. I do wonder why it's Venezuela and not Cuba, but I suspect it's because the Venezuelan state is already sort of internally fractured in a way the Cuban state is not.
Yeah, Cesar, tell us a little bit about what's going on the ground with the I almost said it. You almost got me there, Matthew. Almost said Cuban government with the Venezuelan government. I mean, what is the state of play in Venezuelan society right now?
Yeah, I think Matthew's right with his description of this issue, but also what makes Venezuela way different than Cuba is the presence of legitimized political actors within the country. I'm talking about the Venezuelan opposition itself. That's something that it's very hard to find within Cuba. The Venezuelan opposition is organized. They're actually so organized that last year, Venezuela held presidential elections. The controlled electoral authorities say that Maduro won by a small margin, but the Venezuelan opposition presented the voting tallies for every 80% of the voting in the country, and they could actually prove, and this is online and everyone can check it out, the international media has verified this information, that actually the opposition won by a landslide. So Maduro just refused to go. And This is an ongoing issue that at least the Venezuelan people feel represented by the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado,
Right.
which seems very much aligned with the Trump administration in this issue. So it looks like what makes Venezuela different than many cases of intervention that are in the public debate right now is just the presence of a legitimized, and it looks like a very well organized internal political faction that could run things in the scenario of a democratic transition. And I think, again, Venezuela used to be one of the strongest democracies in this hemisphere, even helping other countries to build their democracies. And there's a huge political tradition that says, or at least signals, that a transition is possible in Venezuela. So I think that's part of the calculations within the administration to say maybe Venezuela is an easy victory.
What sort of brought them down? And I confess I'm not as up to date on Venezuelan history as I should have. But what served to destabilize that strength of democratic republicanism, freedom loving? What happened to change that?
Well, it was an ongoing issue. Venezuela used to be a welfare state, basically financed by oil. Let's remember, Venezuela possesses the largest oil reserves in the world. Not any other country has as much as proven reserves.
Hold on, time out, Cesar. Just for the sake of argument, go back and watch It's a Wonderful Life, the Frank Capra movie around Christmas time. And George Bailey talks about potentially going down and being an engineer. He calls them the Venezuelan oil fields, but we all know he's talking about Venezuela. So for 100 years, we've known about this. I'm sorry, Cesar, go ahead.
Yeah, and right. Venezuela used to be a very important political actor in the international context, even so that there was a direct flight between Paris and Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, in the Concorde, the supersonic plane. So we're talking about a democracy, a very strong democracy, but that was basically run on oil because it was the entire oil industry was nationalized in the 70s. But that created other problems because there was a lot of political clientelism, a lot of dependence was created between individuals and the state. And obviously, if there's so much money and little accountability, there will be a lot of corruption. And that exploded in the 90s specifically. A lot of revolts. There were many governments in Latin America, the so-called neoliberals, trying to implement a reform agenda aligned with the International Monetary Fund. And in that context, Venezuela lived through a really bad crisis and two coup attempts led by Hugo Chavez, who will be later elected as president. So that's pretty much the summary of what happened with this strong democracy.
It really is the issue of pendulum swinging both ways. Matthew, I know you wanted to get in here and say something about that.
I just wanted to add that this is a common thing around the world, the resource curse, where you have oil wealth that comes out of the ground, leads to kind of I think clientelism is a very good way to put it. It leads to this sort of state power because there's actually a really great book, Carbon Democracy, by one of my former professors, Timothy. Well, he's still a professor. He's just not mine anymore. Timothy Mitchell, which talks about how sort of oil creates a completely different model of relationship between the state and society. And Emma Ashford, also formerly of Cato, recently wrote, not recently, I think like 5 years ago,
wrote
a good book. Oil, the State, and War, which also gets into sort of lots of different examples of this. But I think people act like oil is a golden ticket, but oftentimes it is, as they say, a curse. That's all I wanted to add.
So, this is the problem, right? Is that obviously the U.S. has a vibrant history in trying to, promote democracy or promote regime change. For those of you who are listening, I'm using air quotes. And it, and especially in Latin America, it has never really ended well. It's almost always backfired. At the end of the day, this, and obviously we've seen what happens in other Latin American nations when there are troops on the ground trying to foment regime change. It doesn't go. Clausewitz called it the fog of war, right? The fog of war intrudes, and it becomes very difficult. I mean, are we thinking that somehow the Trump administration thinks they know something different about how this can go out? But they haven't expressed anything, have they?
Well, I think their hope is that Machado will just, because as Cesar said, the opposition is really organized, that they can sort of deliver like a hammer blow to the Venezuelan state, and then it'll fall apart, and then the opposition is organized enough they can sweep in. I want to be optimistic that, like, Venezuelan opposition is organized enough that if the state should fall, either by U.S. intervention or internally, they would be able to take the reins. I think that military power is a very iffy way of doing that. When we talk about regime change, the image that comes to mind is the Iraq War and
Right.
the 2003 war, where the U.S. marched in and sort of installed a state directly. And that went very badly for a lot of different reasons we get
Right.
into. I think the model, though, that was more common before and has become more common again is a sort of remote thing where you attack the state, damage it, and then have some local faction try to take power. And that has a very mixed record also, I think, for different reasons. It's less a problem of American micromanagement and more, as you said, a fog of war, where when you bring in that kind of violence and force from the outside and then leave, it's kind of hard to predict the outcome of that. And
Right.
so, there's situations like Libya where you collapse a state and then it breaks into infighting. There's situations like Nicaragua in the 80s where you do succeed at damaging the state. You don't really get rid of the regime, and it
Right.
sort of comes back. And I think I think Cesar can speak a lot more to the specifics of Venezuela. I don't want to speak over him for that, but I think that's the general history.
And Cesar, do that, and then add into this, the one fundamental difference between before, and now is we have the good example of what Hernando de Soto taught us, in The Mystery of Capital, what he was able to do in Peru. How does that figure into all this? Or does it figure into all this?
Yes. Well, I'm pretty much inclined to say Venezuela is a very different case to what most people are pointing out in the regime change conversation, specifically because Venezuelans already choose to change their regime. But there's, in the way that the power structure is built within Venezuela, and there's a really good article by the Wall Street Journal talking about this, it looks like they made, first of all, the military coup-proof. And it's just a way to say that Maduro can buy loyalty. And as long as he has enough money, the military will be loyal to him. And there's a very perverse structure of surveillance and counterintelligence within the military. There's known cases of torture, even denounced by the United Nations. But the second point, which I think it's also really important, is the fact that the Venezuelan armed forces, and by defense analysts, are not organizing for an invasion. I mean, they are not organizing to defend the country from a foreign armed force. They are organizing for a subversion. They are already looking for the day after. So if you take a look at the military drills and the propaganda videos that the regime is pushing out, it's nothing like, let's defend the coasts. It's more like, let's empty the arsenals and move to the mountains and form guerrillas.
Yeah,
so
right.
If something like that ends up happening, I think it will be kind of a mistake, or at least it won't be accurate to say that either foreign intervention or internal fractures of the regime caused a situation of chaos. I think Maduro is already planning for the day after if he falls, and it's going to be chaotic because there's a lot of money involved in here.
Well, this is, I guess, my question, right? So the goal with the U.S. actions thus far is to try to starve off the illegal maintenance of power by the Maduro regime, right? So short of what the United States is doing, how can the nation better, serve that purpose, or should they not serve that purpose at all? And I put it out to either of you.
I mean, it's hard to see exactly that's part of the problem with this war power stuff, right? Is we don't know exactly where they're going with this. And I think it really does depend. I mean, during the first Trump administration, if you read John Bolton's book, a lot of the effort from the U.S. was trying to get the armed forces to defect. And I think there were recent talks in Qatar where they were basically trying to give Maduro like a sort of golden parachute out.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge spectrum from that to an invasion, and then in between would there be assassinations of top leaders? Would there be attacks on the military directly? Like, who knows? This is the problem. Who knows? And I think the way this goes down depends wildly on what course of action they choose to take. Right? It's not. I think that I am a regime change skeptic in most cases, in terms of, not in terms of revolution is bad always, but in terms of the U.S. imposing it. But at the same time, I do think.
Hold on for a second, Matthew. It's the line from the movie Charlie Wilson's War, right? I don't know if you guys, either of you ever
No,
seen
I haven't
Charlie?
seen it.
Oh, listen, both of you have a homework assignment. It's like 90 minutes. It's 100 minutes. It's a short watch. But Gus Avracatos, who's the CIA case officer who is sort of leading internally the effort to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan, he tells the story about the Zen master and the young boy, and it's about the concept of wait and see, right? Which is, so this is going to happen. Well, that's good, and that's bad. Well, we shall see. And then losing it in the end game. So I highly recommend that. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew. I apologize.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying, even though I'm a general skeptic of regime change, I think skeptics of regime change do tend to sort of flatten or generalize this. And I think there's a lot of different ways it could go. I think there's a narrow path it could go well. There's a lot of different ways to go badly, but it was very highly dependent on how it happens. And I think the worst case is the one that Cesar outlined, in which there's a sort of civil war or insurgency where, like, you go from a scenario where Maduro is in the capital but the country's falling apart around him, to one where Machado is in the capital and the country's falling apart. But I don't want to prognosticate that that's what's going to happen. I think it's, again, really highly dependent on what everyone involved does.
Do you think at the end of the day, so there are some folks who are looking at what happened in Panama in the early 1990s, where it's just, there's a quick airborne drop. They grabbed Noriega and put him on trial. I mean, is that playing into all this? Either of you?
Yeah, I mean, all the observers from Venezuela that are more optimistic about the future of the country are constantly pointing to Panama as the example for what, let's say, this influence or intervention from the U.S. could look like. Yeah. But obviously, there are many differences. First of all, Panama is way smaller than Venezuela, and their military was way smaller than Venezuela's. So it's hard to compare, but at least it's a good blueprint to say, well, in some cases, if certain conditions are met within the country, and I will say probably the economic interest of the U.S. in Panama is a big incentive to promote stable political institutions. Well, if those conditions are met in Venezuela, maybe we can do something like that. And I think there are they have some grade of truth with this example. Because if you take a look at the defense or the intelligence analysts from Venezuela, they will say, like, the military is not really dispersed in the country. If you take a look at the operations far away from Caracas, the capital, in the smaller cities or in the border, it looks like the situation is pretty bad. They don't have enough resources even to get enough food for soldiers. Right. So maybe there's a grade of certainty in which you can say the operation, if it happens, can focus in Caracas only and could be successful, focusing just in one city, removing Maduro from the capital. It looks like it's just its base. Maybe they have some certainty in that.
Yeah. So let's talk about these U.S. military actions against the alleged drug boats. Talk about executive branch power, war powers. What does the United States? What power does the United States have in terms of interdicting drug smuggling into the United States? Talk about this. Either one of you, feel free to jump in.
So I think, drug smuggling traditionally is a law enforcement thing, right? You're supposed to arrest people. And I think they're making a point of not doing that, of killing people when you can arrest them. In general, I can speak more to this because this is actually, the Middle East is my area of expertise. And I think this follows a lot from the logic of U.S. action in the Middle East. We sort of live in an age where constitutional war powers don't really matter. It's sort of the president does it and dares Congress to stop them. And a big structure outlining all of this is the power to declare people terrorists.
Right.
Because that is entirely up to the discretion of the president. Any foreign group that's armed, basically, they can give them a terrorist designation. That doesn't come with war powers. That's not a declaration of war. Legally, the terrorist designation is to do with economic sanctions, immigration law, domestic law enforcement powers, things like that. It's basically illegal to do business with a foreign terrorist organization or to come to the U.S. if you have membership in one. But I think the Trump administration understands politically that when people hear the word terrorist, they think we're at war with them.
Right.
I think the actual legal justification they're using in this case is just Article 2, the power of the president as commander-in-chief to just basically do things with the military. I think that the framers of the Constitution did not intend that to mean starting wars. I think they meant that to be waging wars that have already been declared by Congress. But in practice, I mean, that's how it works. It's sort of the president can do it unless Congress stops them. I think beyond this specific case, it's a very dangerous thing to have in American law, but I don't think this is just something in Venezuela. This is sort of a accumulation of the past 30 years.
I'm thinking about it because it's on the high seas. You know, I want to say it was President Jefferson sending the U.S. Navy to go after the Barbary pirates along the Barbary coast. I mean, there's that kind of precedent. You know, piracy is a law enforcement issue. I'm not even sure what the U.S. economic interests were. Obviously, long-term diplomatic, it made Morocco very happy, and they've been one of our strongest allies. I'm sorry, Cesar, you looked like you wanted to add in something there.
Yeah, at least from Venezuela, there's a radical difference in which the news regarding the airstrikes are at least presented. So there's a really good reporting by the Venezuelan independent outlet El Pitazo, in which, this is an alliance of journalists that have been reporting on the ground for many, many years. And they went to, after the first strike happened in the Caribbean, they went to the small fishing town, the fishing village, from which supposedly that boat departed, and they got some inside information about the people, obviously talking about the people that were killed, that they lived in this town, and they ended up with a really interesting story about this town called San Juan de Unare in Sucre State. This is really close to Trinidad and Tobago. How this town has been actually taken over by Tren de Aragua for many, many years. And there's proof that these international drug operations happened. And they're just recruiting people that could be fishermen in most of the year to do these trips with drugs. And we have names, we have pictures of the people. And at least it's kind of weird to realize that you have Venezuelan journalists basically risking their life, reporting these facts from Venezuela, and we still don't have any evidence from the Trump administration, even though they supposedly know these people, they have audios, pictures, or whatever. But what I will say is that the idea that the U.S. is killing innocent fishermen in international waters is not really holding up to independent journalism from these countries, and both from Venezuela and Colombia.
I think part of the point of the Trump administration I think this is part of the problem. The whether or not it's true, I think the Trump administration is making a point of not showing the evidence because they want to show, both in Venezuela but also globally, like, we can do this and we don't have to ask. We don't have to go to the court of public opinion or Congress or an actual court.
Is there some element, do you think, Matthew, that they're daring folks to try to say otherwise? You know, the Washington Post, MSNBC, whatever the sort of the traditional New York Times, and so that they can then turn around and share the evidence and say, you know, hey, you guys doubted us here. So, you know, they're sort of waiting for that. I mean, a lot of what is happening is a lot of testing of guardrails. Right, trying to hem in it, weirdly enough, in some ways, to hem in the power of the executive branch, so that it hems in sort of a President Newsom, a President Buttigieg, whatever. What are your thoughts here about sort of trying to dare them with this kind of information?
I think it's more simple than that. I think it's just the idea as we're going to do this. We don't have to tell you what we're going to do, and we don't really have to tell you what we did. You just have to sort of take our word for it that this is in the national security interests of the U.S. I think this is different from like the substantive issue of like the nature of the Venezuelan government, its entanglement with organized crime. I think part of the reason they chose this case is, again, it's such an easy one, right? It's like a government that's falling apart, that isn't that we have, that is entangled with organized crime, and so they may calculate, like, it's not even that they're daring people to sort of so they can pull out the real information. It's sort of they're calculating that people just will be torn or won't object because the ends of this are perceived as good or just.
Right.
But I think, yeah, again, there's a problem because even, I mean, there are plenty of American wars that started with good intentions, that perhaps even turned out well, that ended up expanding the government to do bad things also.
I used to say the most well-intentioned policies eventually bump up against very real realities. And then my father said, Andrew, let me simplify that for you. There are many roads to utopia, however, all must traverse the surface of the earth. Which, you know, it seems to suffice in this case. So, I mean, both of you guys, you know, wave your magic wands a little bit. You know, what? Let's assume for a moment that there is drug smuggling that's happening. It's being done by organized crime. That it's something that we need to stop. I mean, obviously, there's a whole spectrum of libertarianism here that's at work. But where would you guys engage in the interdiction? How would you engage in it? What would you guys be doing?
I mean, I think you should do what police have always done and arrest people on the high seas. This has never really been something outside the. I mean, there's no perfect enforcement. I think, of course, also, you know, the war on drugs itself is problematic. But yeah, I think there's no problem of if they have surveillance on these guys, there's no problem in arresting them and bringing them to court of law. I think that is totally separate from the question of what should happen to Venezuela and its future. And I think for that, I will defer completely to Cesar because he's actually from there.
Yeah, Cesar, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because I'm obviously biased here. If the U.S. government does something that hurts the Maduro regime and brings the Venezuelan people closer to freedom, I would say that's generally good. But obviously, there are concerns about the methods, about the ways to do that. And I would say by the degree in which narco trafficking and criminality and horrible crimes are intertwined with the Venezuelan regime, I would say this is an unique situation that is far away from regular law enforcement. So just to put it into perspective, Pablo Escobar, which is obviously this big narco figure that it's even in pop culture right now, Pablo Escobar always dreamed of becoming a politician. He wanted to be a senator. He wanted to be a president. He wanted to control the power of the state because in his calculations, that will help him in his drug smuggling businesses by a lot. And basically in Venezuela, what we have is the dream of Pablo Escobar. These corrupt politicians that started with a socialist project at some point realized that they were all criminals, and the best way to engage with that reality was just pushing forward into that path. So I think these, at least these actions from the Trump administration have shown that the Maduro regime needs drug trafficking to be stable. And that stabilization for Venezuelans mean prosecution, torture, crimes against humanity. So I would say in this situation, it looks like there's some justification. I'm concerned about the implications for the U.S. political institutions, and I don't feel safe with saying, well, let's make Venezuela the justification for the Trump administration to act like an authoritarian regime. But definitely there's some degree in which this could lead to a better outcome in Venezuela.
Let's pull that back a little bit there, and before we go, and I got a couple more questions here. So let's talk about the issue of war powers. And is it time, Matthew, that we've gone through these periods where we've talked about trying to get Congress to take greater responsibility in this process? Want to get your thoughts here, Cesar? Get your thoughts as well, because you spent enough time here. the balance of power when things get out of whack, right? That's not the way the Constitution had intended it all. Is it time for us to have a much greater, deeper, more thorough conversation about the balance of power?
Yes, absolutely. But the problem is I don't see political will to do that.
Right.
I think if you want to look at the sort of long historical scale, I wrote an essay for the Critic magazine in England called, I think, Why Liberal Hawks Rule the Roost, which talks about these sort of cycles where you had the Vietnam War, and that had been another thing sort of foisted on the American public by the presidency without much oversight from Congress, and then
Right.
Congress sort of went along with it. It went badly, and so it led to a huge sort of retrenchment and rebalancing of power in the U.S. internally, a sort of look at our foreign policy and democratization of that. And then for the next 20 years, or 20 or 30 years, the U.S. became obsessed with, or not the U.S., but the American political class became obsessed with trying to kick Vietnam syndrome and show that
Right.
actually these unilateral presidential wars can work. And I think Panama actually is an example of them doing that and it kind of working out for the better. And they tested the waters with these small conflicts where nothing went badly, and the presidential power sort of expanded until the Iraq War. That went badly.
Yeah, the second Iraq War, yeah.
Yeah, the second Iraq War. And then you had the sort of Obama administration, another pullback of presidential powers, much weaker than the post-Vietnam one, but there still was a retrenchment. And then I think the U.S. is now we're going through the same cycle again. And so unfortunately, I'm sort of pessimistic. I think it needs to happen, but before there is a disaster, but I'm sort of pessimistic that it will happen until there is one. As you can tell, I think I'm a lot more of a pessimist on both global and American politics than
no. Well, listen, I mean,
César
it's hard not to be a little cynical. I mean, the reality is that there aren't a lot of. I mean, you can talk about Clausewitz, or you can talk about De Seversky, or you can talk about Mahan and sort of general sort of theories there. But when it comes down to it, every particular battlefield is its own unique battlefield. So, you have Panama, you have Grenada, but at the same time, you have, Somalia and you have Fallujah. I mean, it's all, they all come with their own, individual. You have Kabul. I mean, it's, all of those things. Cesar, waving your magic wand. I mean, what would you want to see?
I mean, if my magic wand will be just, I think there's a good point here in which this escalation is just an escalation to show Maduro that if the U.S. decides, they can bomb him directly and attack the top regime officials directly. So it's a much deal to just go to Cuba or Russia or Turkey and live in exile, like even get away with money, whatever. I think there's a ongoing debate in Venezuelan public opinion about this. If maybe we can just trade justice for peace, like just let us have the country back and you go do whatever you want. That's ideal. That's my ideal. That's just.
Yeah, that would be a much better outcome if he just left and if he just got scared and left than if they actually went in and did something.
Right. At the end of the day, right, the question is how do we damage his influx of cash to the point where he's willing to accept that golden parachute? I mean, I think that's sort of where we're going. As you guys pointed out, it's there are very few perfect paths or very few best paths. There are a lot of really bad ones. Liz, before I let you guys go, I talk about this with my other guests. I almost did a podcast. I do 3 podcasts. Nobody should do 3 podcasts. And yes, I had suggested to David, not at Reason, that they do a Reason Radio thing. But one of the podcasts I was contemplating for a while was something I was calling Outside Interests, which is to talk to folks in politics and policy about the things that they do that are not related at all to politics and policy. So I put it to both of you. I'll start with you, Matthew. When you're not doing your work, how do you spend your free time? What are some of your outside interests?
I'm really into photography, both digital and film.
Excellent.
And yeah, I also have just become absolutely obsessed with the Arctic. I think all of the Reason staff because I wrote a travel log about going to the Arctic, and actually have a book right next to me.
Nice.
that I've been reading. I've been reading all of the literature about the Arctic that I can.
Nice. That's fantastic. That's really interesting stuff, man. Cesar, you.
I think you will be disappointed.
Nope.
But basically, before joining Reason, what I did for fun was making videos for my social media, talking about politics and trying to explain whatever was happening in Venezuela to my friends and family. And eventually those videos got pretty viral. And that's one of the reasons why I joined Reason. So what I used to do for fun,
I'm gonna throw a curveball at you then. What's the one dish you missed most from home? And what's your favorite American dish? So what's your favorite thing to have since coming to the States?
So I grew up in the border between Venezuela and Colombia. It's culturally significantly different from like mainstream Venezuelan culture. If you know any Venezuelans, all Venezuelans love the arepas, but we have something called pastel, which I don't even know how to describe in English.
Okay,
but it's a fried pastry filled with, it could be cheese or guava or beef, chicken, whatever, and it's really good.
It's essentially a donut.
I love cheese and guayaba together. It's a great combo.
Yeah, but it's essentially it's like kind of like a donut at the end of the day, or I know.
It's quite different, but this is the first time that I'm trying to explain that in English.
I love it. That's awesome. And your favorite thing since coming here?
You know what? I think it's not American, but ethnic food. I mean, just having the opportunity to try stuff from pretty much anywhere in the world. I'm based in Washington, D.C. It's a pretty cosmopolitan place. I think that's marvelous. I grew up in a small town in Venezuela where the options were pretty limited. So I like that about the U.S.
And Matthew, did you grow up in Philadelphia, New Jersey, or New York City, New Jersey?
No, like New York City suburbs.
All right. So for you, is it pizza if it's made outside of the tri-state area, or is it something else entirely?
No, it's not pizza if it's made outside
There you go.
It's some kind of meat cheese pie, but it's not pizza.
I am very fortunate in where I live. There's a pizza maker, because I live in the hinterlands of Virginia. We have a pizza shop owner who's from Brooklyn. So, to me, the determining factor is being able to get pizza by the slice. So that's that. Listen, gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us today. How do folks find out more about the good work you guys are doing?
First of all, read Reason magazine. Go to reason.com and. That's the first thing I'll pitch.
Yeah, no, me too. I totally subscribe. Go to reason.com. But if you speak Spanish and want to be more engaged with Venezuelan politics, you can always follow me on social media. My socials are pretty much my name, César Báez.
Báez, B-A-I-E-Z, B-A-E-Z. Got it. Yes, there we go. I almost put an I in there.
Yeah, and follow the Reason social media like Instagram and YouTube, because not just reason.com, also you can get video content.
100% go and check them out. Matthew Petti, he's the assistant editor at Reason. And then César Báez, he is a producer at Reason. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This has been yet another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. Check us out on our YouTube channel. Just go there. If you're watching us, you can go and take us with you wherever you get your fine audio podcast content. Just about every audio podcast platform that's out there. Hit the subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment. Let your friends and family members and family members' friends and friends' family members know how much you're enjoying it. Follow us on X at the Lunch Hour Pod, and follow me at Andrew_Langer. Yes, I'm Andrew Langer, your host. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.